Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Bit light on certain sides here this evening, but hopefully that will soon adjust itself. But perhaps, like me, they were reluctant to drag themselves away from the fascinating one-day international cricket this evening and come here. Right, a few housekeeping tips this evening. I am Clive English, the Chairman of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. This august proceeding will be webcast for the multitudes of viewers. Can I just ask if anyone else is likely to be recording the events this evening, just not to stop anyone, just in case we would like to know. Anyone? No, that's just the official recording then. Members are reminded to address the meeting by way of the microphone and to ensure that it's turned off when they are not speaking. Can I also on that note ask members to switch their mobile phones to silent or switch them off entirely if, like me, you keep forgetting where the silent button is. Finally, if there is no scheduled fire alarm test as far as I know this evening, so if it goes off we'll have to assume it's a genuine emergency. We will await the instructions of the Democratic Services Officer having assessed the situation on how we should evacuate the building should that be necessary. So without further ado I shall move on to the formal business this evening. Item 1, apologies for absence, and I have received them from Councillor Hinder. Are there any others? Councillor Round.
I have an apology from Councillor Hasty, who's still intending to get here, but however she is delayed having an MRI scan at hospital at the moment. She doesn't tend to come ASAP.
Those things can take a while, so. Do we have any substitute members? Councillor Jabinsky?
Councillor Jabinsky for Councillor Hinder.
Thank you very much indeed. So I assume our other members are on their way and are just fighting their way through Maidstone's notorious traffic.
I know that Councillor Blackmore cannot make it, and I don't know whether anybody offered to substitute for her, and Councillor Webb is not able to make it.
Thank you very much indeed. Those additional apologies are noted. Thank you. Can we have notification of any urgent items, please?
Thank you, Chairman. So, members, this evening there are no urgent items, but there is an urgent update to item 14 for the appointment of a working group, and that is the proposed working group membership as put forward by group leaders, and there is a list on each of your desks.
Thank you very much indeed. Item 4, visiting members. Do you have any visiting members? Well, we do have the honour of a cabinet member here this evening, or whether that counts as a visiting member or not. But welcome.
I'm going to say I'll be what you want, but then I thought that sounded a bit rude.
Item 5, are there any disclosures by members or officers? No. Item 6, have any members of the committee been lobbied? Not on this agenda. Item 7, to consider whether any items should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. Not aware of any, so I move that all items be taken in public as proposed. Is that agreed? Thank you, members. Right, they have minutes of the meeting of the 13th of April, which were circulated separately. Seems a long time ago. Are there any comments on the accuracy or otherwise of those minutes? Sorry, yes. Sorry, yes, that's must be a misprint. Yes, sorry, apologise, that's the wrong agenda there. My apologies for that. Minutes of the previous meeting of this committee, I'll get that right in a minute. That's the minutes of the 20th of June 2023. Can there be any comments on the accuracy or otherwise of those minutes? So I assume we can adopt those then, and I'll sign them later. Oh, be it noted that Councillor Hasty has entered the room. Do you have any disclosures?
I do not.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor. Any declarations of lobbying?
No.
Thank you. Presentation of petitions. There are no petitions this evening. Item 10, questions from local residents. There are no questions. Item 11, there are no questions from members of the council or the committee to the chairman, so that's a shame that. We move on to the forward plan, which is on pages 4 to 14. Has anyone any questions or comments on the forward plan? I'll take that as a no then. So no questions or comment. Are there any particular items that members would like to see added? No, in that case, Councillor Clark.
Yes, I can submit this for the next agenda set perhaps, but I was looking to add the integrated transport package onto our... Oh, sorry, I was thinking of, I'm planning to add the integrated transport package onto this work programme so that we can scrutinise the progress against the plan and the progress to date.
Yes. I think that that is something that we will put on the agenda for consideration under this item at the next meeting to see how far we have got with the work so far. We will review it at the next full meeting of this committee, and if it's possible, we will add it. Oh, Councillor Round.
Can I just say at this juncture that we did agree that we have a very, very busy schedule with a lot of work involved. And I would be the first to agree that given time, that is the next one we deal with. But having said that, I think we must stick to what we've got so far.
Which is why I said we'd review it in the next meeting, see how we're going. Thank you. Having said that, if there are no further comments, I move that the work programme be noted. Thank you very much. Item 14, the meat of the discussion this evening. We've had a very successful stage one of the water cycle working group. The membership perforce must change because very sadly Councillor Bryce is no longer a councillor, which is a big loss to the council, whatever political hat you happen to be wearing, I think. So we perforce need to change the membership. So I wrote out two group leaders a number of times actually, and I've received nominations from all of the groups other than the Conservative group. So if I can read out the nominations we've already got, then I'll come back. Oh, one moment. Councillor Cannon, welcome to the meeting. Do you have any disclosures? And any disclosures of lobbying? Your next one.
No.
Okay, thank you. So the nominations we've had so far, Liberal Democrat group, myself and Councillor Harwood. The independent group waived, and consequently Paul Harper has been nominated for that. Labour have nominated Maureen Cleater, and the Green and Independent Alliance have nominated Stuart Jeffrey. We need two nominations and preferably a substitute from the Conservative group. Councillor Round.
Yeah, on the basis that Headcorn's been living on standby taps for the last 6 weeks, and on the basis that we've got plenty of dirty water as well as clean water problems, both Councillor Zabrinsky and myself are prepared to stand as one. Ziggy will do the role, I will act as sub.
We need a second substantive member from the Conservative group. Do you know if Councillor Garton was willing to continue, as he was on it before? I've had no indication of one way or the other. He can't, he's in the Cabinet, sorry. Yes, so we need to replace Councillor Garton. Siggy, if you are prepared to be on the committee and not just a substitute, and that would allow us, because of time pressure, to appoint Val as a substitute, because I think she would be willing to do that, but rather than serve as the substantive member. But she has contributed significantly. Would that be okay to the Conservative group? Thank you very much. Then we now have a full list, I think. Yes, I will ask if the Liberal Democrat members would like to nominate a substitute member. Councillor Clark. And we are not in a position, we didn't nominate substitutes for the smaller groups, but if they wish to do so.
Not at this time, no.
My understanding is that Phantom Oakwood Group did not wish to nominate a substitute. The Green Independent Alliance, did you want to nominate a substitute? Councillor Thompson. The list now, please.
Yep, so the members, I'll go in order of the groups listed on the table. So Councillor Stravinsky and Round for the Conservative group, with Councillor Springett as a substitute. Councillors English and Harwood for the Liberal Democrat group, with Councillor Clark as a substitute. Councillor Harper for the Fan and Oakwood Independent group with no substitute. Councillor Cleater for the Labour group with no substitute. And then Councillor Stuart Jeffrey for the Green Independent Alliance with Councillor Thompson as substitute.
Right, is that agreed, members? I'd like to propose that from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Clark. All those in favour? Thank you very much indeed. Well, that brings us to the end of that meeting. Thank you. We will recommence in two or 3 minutes' time. If anyone needs to take a short break, now would be a good time. All right, if we can be reconvening, members, please. I'm staggered to say that the clock in the town hall is actually accurate at the moment. So if we can be drawing ourselves back together. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of this evening's fascinating double-headed committee meeting. I am Councillor Clive English, and I welcome you to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, acting as the Crime and Disorder Committee. As I said earlier, tonight's proceedings will be webcast live to our audience of hundreds of thousands and recorded for playback. If anyone else is intending to record these proceedings, can you please let me know now? That's not to stop you, that's just so we know. No? Okay. Members are reminded to only address the meeting by way of the microphone, and please try and speak reasonably closely to the microphone as they are quite sensitive. Also, can you ensure that your mobile phones are either switched to silent, or if, like me, you struggle to find where the silent button is, just turn them off. If the fire alarm does sound, we'll have to assume it is a genuine fire alarm because we haven't been pre-warned of any fire drill this evening. So we'll just wait for the Democratic Services officers to assess the situation and hopefully return to give us further instructions on how to evacuate the building. So without further ado, I move on to the agenda items. Item 1, apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Hinder, and I am also aware now that we have apologies from Councillors Blackmore and Councillor Webb. Are there any others? No. Can I ask any substitute members to confirm attendance? Councillors.
Councillor Trubinsky for Councillor Hinder.
Item 3, urgent items. There are no urgent items, but the minutes of the previous meeting, which was some time ago, were circulated to the committee earlier today. Are there any comments on those minutes, if anyone can remember? I think they're accurate. In that case, can I propose that we approve those minutes and I sign them later? Thank you very much. Visiting members, we don't exactly have any visiting members, but we do have the honour of having the relevant cabinet member here this evening. Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Item 5, disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures by members or officers? Nope. Item 6, disclosures of lobbying. We haven't directly been lobbied, but we have been made aware of some lobbying material that went to the Policy Advisory Committee about this. So, indirect lobbying, perhaps. Item 7, to consider whether any item should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. I move that all items be taken in public as proposed. Is that agreed? Thank you. Item 8, we've agreed those already. Item 9, presentation of petitions, if any. There are no petitions this evening. Question 10, item 10, sorry, question and answer session. There are no questions from local residents. Shame, I have to suggest that we get some. See, this is a problem when the person who asks all the questions gets elected to the council. Item 11, questions from members to the chairman, if any. There are no questions from members this evening. Now we move on to the meat of the issues this evening, which is the Public Spaces Protection Order Town Centre Renewal, which will be introduced by Councillor Parfitt-Reid, the Cabinet Member for Housing and Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, members. I take it the report as read. Public space protection orders need to be renewed every 3 years. A PSPO is a legislative tool practice which allows NBC officers, Kent Police and other stakeholders to challenge antisocial behaviour. You will see that this review has been done in consultation with local stakeholders such as Kent Police. It has also been through a public consultation, which has found that renewal is the preferred option. As you will see, there are 2 distinct provisions, begging and alcohol. The purpose of the PSBO is to stop the antisocial behaviour associated with begging and alcohol consumption, not to create offences. As far as begging is concerned, we must recognise that these behaviours are often undertaken by the most vulnerable in society, so there is often a need for support, and this remains our first priority, which is where our outreach team are supported by community protection officers, 1 Maidstone ambassadors plus the police. They can work collaboratively you know what I mean, with the town centre task force to support and signpost people to the right services. It is therefore a leverage to support rather than a stick. For professional beggars, it is to act as a deterrent. The alcohol, that's pretty much used by Kent Police and the One Maidstone ambassadors. And just to make a note, the Overview and Scrutiny Committee in its latest town centre review did not make any suggestions or recommendations to change the approach of anything in the antisocial behaviour toolkit. So as the Cabinet Member for Housing and Health, I support the renewal, but I welcome feedback from this committee. And I just would like, as a little add, to urge anyone sitting on this committee that has any concern about the PSBO to go out. Every 7 weeks we have something called All Out Friday, and that is where we get the police, the violence reduction unit, One Maidstone ambassadors, Kent Youth Services, and the vulnerability investigations team all come together and work in the town centre. And those evenings are, I've found as cabinet member, really useful in seeing all the outreach work and the work that our officers are doing with stakeholders to support vulnerable people. So yeah, I would urge anybody around this committee to take that opportunity, because I'm sure Martin would make them welcome. Thank you.
We also have John Littlemore and Martin James here. Would you like to just introduce yourselves?
Thank you, Chair. John Littlemore, Head of Housing and Regulatory Services. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Martin Jeans, Community and Strategic Partnerships Manager for Maidstone Borough Council.
Would either of you like to add anything at this particular juncture?
Only to add, thank you, Chair, only to add that you may be aware that this item was also reviewed recently by the Housing, Health and Environment Policy Advisory Committee. So there was quite a good discussion, I feel, at that meeting around the same issues that might be of concern to yourselves. And I think we were at pains to point out at that meeting, and it might be helpful for members in their discussion this evening, to understand that there are other policies that sit behind the PSPO. There's an enforcement policy that members adopted. There's also the Safer Maidstone Partnership Community Safety Plan that sets out what the Cabinet Member has described in terms of the support and the approach that your officers take long before we consider any punitive action which the PSPO allows us to do. And I think it's important also to add that in the last 3 years, because of the work that's been undertaken by the various services in Maidstone, not only have we seen a significant reduction in rough sleeping, which I know is always a concern when we talk about begging, whether this is an instrument that's targeting rough sleepers, and I want to be clear that it is not, but it has helped us in the past to reduce rough sleeping, particularly amongst those who were very much entrenched rough sleepers. We've not had to issue a fine in the last 3 years in relation to the begging element, and I think that speaks volumes about the approach that's taken by your officers, that it's there in the back pocket if it's needed, if somebody is being very belligerent, but in most instances, because we can signpost people to help at Trinity now, it's not necessary to go down that pathway, but it remains an important tool to enable your officers to keep Maidstone Town Centre in a place that everybody wants to come to work and visit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Obviously, the Public Spaces Protection Order doesn't come out of nowhere. We've had long debates over this before, and we quite clearly as a council excluded going down the Manchester path, which was effectively criminalising being homeless, which is what Manchester City Council have done. And every single person found rough sleeping is pretty much slapped with a fixed penalty notice, which they pretty much can't pay, which is pretty silly, really. So we deliberately excluded that. The alcohol we specifically included because obviously there have been quite a lot of issues over the years for people committing crimes under the influence. Although looking at the consultation response, I do think we've got a bit of work to do on getting people to understand it, because it's not an absolute prohibition of drinking in public spaces, which I think a lot of people believe it is. So I think there is a comprehension issue there. Speaking to the order over, generally speaking, we had the very good, by the way, Martin, cluster meeting for the town centre this morning, very positive, a lot of good things happening. But what is quite clear is that in terms of some of the outlying areas, there is perhaps a resource issue in terms of the enforcement of some of the public space protection orders, not so much in the town centre itself, although there is, but some in the outlying areas which are covered by it, like the Len Valley Nature Reserve, for example, where there is, or parts of Watman Park at occasion. So I'll come on to other issues later, but if we can just look at the alcohol side first. So in terms of, shall we say, resourcing that issue, because I think we have, a belief that the order works, but an order is only as good as the enforcement. Any comments on that?
Thank you, Chair. I think there's an obsession when we talk about enforcement tools to look at the potential outcomes in terms of the criminal justice system. And as with a lot of legislation in the last decade, a lot of them come with the provision for us to issue fixed penalty notices. So there's a default to look at outcomes in terms of what we achieve in terms of sanctions. The areas of concern, I think one of the things that the Town Centre Task Force was quick to recognise was to identify areas of the town centre whereby we were receiving significant number of complaints and concerns. They were primarily in regards to alcohol, Jubilee Square, the McDonald's, KFC area of Week Street, and then Cannon Square just down the way. Through dogged determination, frequent visits, high visibility patrols, seizure of alcohol, and the provisions that are laid out within the stages of the alcohol provision specifically, we have significantly reduced the antisocial behaviour in those locations over the last year. There is a consequence of that in that we have very much disrupted that behaviour, and we have in probably many factors moved it to other locations. And I think there's a secondary factor there in that our public space protection order does not cater for dealing with alcoholics. So if you have people with needs that will need to drink, they will find a location where they feel comfortable to do so. Unfortunately, they are vulnerable people within society, and they attract other people that will target them. And that is what we're seeing in the amphitheatre and some of the locations along the river. So as our nature, because we are now comfortable with the fact that the Jubilee Square and Cannon Square are relatively under control, our patrol routes now include those areas where the vulnerable people have moved to, so that we can continue to offer the support, but because they're a little bit further out of the way and we still need the rest of the town centre to be looked after, we have to kind of balance how much attention they get. So it is an unfortunate consequence of very good work in two other locations, but it's certainly on our radar of an area that needs to be monitored, and that will continue to be so. So much so that in the recent ballot for the renewal of One Maidstone, the result which is yet to be confirmed formally, they extended their area to include areas of Lockmeadow and the other side of the river so that they could use their ambassadors to support businesses on a wider geographical area.
Thank you, that's very helpful, Mr. James. Councillor Thompson, I think you indicated.
Thank you, Chair. With due respect to the Cabinet Member and all those... Thank you, Chair. With due respect to the work of the Cabinet Member and those that have preceded you in this important and very sober area, excuse the pun, please, comments that officers have made about the human needs, which are complex beyond my experience, with respect to all of those things, I notice in the report, not least on page 36, the submission from Liberty, that we need to take due account of the changing legal realities that did not pertain previously. Things are changing. So without wanting to make financial issues any more important than the human issues and the due diligence that has been shown by this and previous administrations, which I note with thanks, can I ask that this committee recommends that the lead member obtains independent legal advice prior to reviewing the PSPO?
I was going to come, Steve, if you don't
Yes.
mind, I was going to deal with the alcohol issues first and then come on to that second point, if you don't mind.
Very good, Chair. Thank you for your guidance.
Sorry about that.
Not at all.
Can I have any comments on the alcohol side of it first?
Yeah, just in terms of obviously offering support and prevention, we know that CGL is the organisation that people will go to, but I'm just concerned a lot of the preventative work, whether it's in the town centre or whether it's elsewhere out, is done a lot by PCSOs and community wardens, both of whom have either been cut or are in the process of being cut, and the impact that's going to have on our ability to do that work, to work with vulnerable people, because they're usually the first port of call. PCSOs, for example, have a very good relationship. I know, for example, one of the proposals for the community wardens is going to involve somebody looking after Marden, Yaldon, Staple-ish. I mean, it's a huge area, and with respect, it's only one person. And why that's not, whilst that's not the purview of this council, it's going to impact on the work that we're doing to try and ensure that those who are vulnerable get the help and support they need. And I'm concerned about people falling through the cracks as well. So whilst I understand that this needs to be renewed, the issue over alcohol, which usually involves sometimes petty crime, but more often than not harm to self, is how we as a borough council can either link in or make more use of resources we have, because at the moment we seem to be have to backfill cuts from other areas, and that's putting a lot of pressure on our outreach workers. So I just wondered what your comments were on that, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we absolutely share the concerns you've expressed. We're aware that County Council is under quite significant financial pressures, and obviously they are looking at ways of making budgetary savings. But I think I'd agree with you that we will certainly, as officers, be responding to the consultation, and I encourage members, if you're so moved to do so as well, to express exactly the concerns that you've raised, that it will mean a diminution in those sorts of services and a stretching of our own to backfill that. So yes, I entirely share your concerns, but I think also to say that our outreach service does go outside of the town centre as well. So we do pick up those issues that fall outside of the centre, but absolutely, if there are cuts made in the way that's proposed, it will have an impact, and that is unfortunate. And we would, as I say, I'd encourage everyone to respond to that consultation. Thank you.
I just follow that up and ask whether the Cabinet is intending, or may even have done so, if in case I've missed it, to that consultation about KCC ward.
Yes, I anticipate that we will do a formal response. Well, we haven't actually spoken about it directly, but in the same vein that we did a formal response to the closure of the children's centres.
Think I speak for everyone here to encourage you to do so. Yeah. Councillor Round.
I was just going to say, I'm optimistic that we will have a very robust response to that consultation, and that indeed not only does the relevant PAC committee have sight of what we might be presenting, but also this committee, in that, as Councillor Cleater has mentioned, has a serious number of knock-on effects in terms of crime and disorder. And I think it's particularly relevant that this committee actually has oversight of any form of response to that.
We may well wish to want to comment ourselves in support of the Cabinet, to add further weight, demonstrate that it comes from all parts of the Council.
Absolutely, like we did for the Children's Centre, that was something that I brought to the committee and it was added to from around this chamber. So, noted.
I think that was a positive comment. Any further comments on the alcohol part of this discussion, which I think is the less controversial part of it by a long way? Okay, so I think we can say, I propose that as far as that part of the order is concerned, this committee supports the renewal of the Public Spaces Protection Order. I propose that. Is that seconded? Councillor Cleater, all those in favour? Right, thank you. Now again on to the issue that Councillor Thompson was so enthusiastic about that he started. Would you mind saying that again, Councillor?
Thank you, Chair. I'm grateful for your direction. May I take it as read that we're grateful for efforts both politically and from officers that have been invested in the past in this serious area, and that is noted. So my point is that the legal situation may have changed, likely has changed since the last time the PSPO was put into effect, and we should take due note of what's on page 36 in the report as an example of the challenge that we might face. While the human factors are more important, we need to be paying attention to the possibility of legal challenge. So I propose that we, the committee, recommends that the lead member obtains independent legal advice prior to renewing the PSPO to gain assurance that the eventual decision taken by Council doesn't leave us open to any future legal challenge that we might foresee, and any expense that losing such a challenge would likely incur.
I will open a debate on this shortly. Is that seconded? Yeah. Councillor Eagle. I've been doing some research today and over the weekend, and the legal challenge was by Liberty against the actions of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council, which inherited an order from Poole Council. Well, and of course the new unitary was created. It is not quite as clear-cut as one would like, because what happened was the council administration changed. A frequent occurrence in Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, that the administration changes, and the Cabinet withdrew the proposal as such, and then went out to consultation. Consultation came back fairly heavily against the renewal. At that stage it was dropped, and therefore the potential case that Liberty were going to pursue didn't go to court. In December 2020 it was withdrawn because the council had acceded to the request that Liberty had made. So we're not entirely certain. It is quite hard to tell what the outcome of that case would have been, although one would assume that at least some of the lawyers who worked for the unitary authority were at least concerned about the case. There were some differences, correct me if I get this wrong, but I think it's fair to say there were some differences in that the unitary authority were still targeting rough sleeping in a way that we weren't. That doesn't mean there aren't still some concerns though. So I think in the letter that Liberty sent to us there was some assumption that we were targeting rough sleeping as well, which we are not. However, having looked at the specific wording in the policy of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council and our order, there are similarities in relation to the begging clause. So there's two questions really I'd like to start this off with before we get any further. In practice, we have not pursued the policy that Bournemouth Council, to abbreviate it, were following, which was quite aggressive prosecutions. We haven't done that, but you couldn't tell, and I take the point about deterrence value. If you look at our order, you wouldn't know, looking at the order, all about the supporting documents. So is there a way of making it clearer without losing the deterrence value? What the actual overarching policy situation is, and that might require us to actually get legal advice on how we present that, because we would not want to lose a case because of something we're actually not doing. So I'll ask the question about how we present the policy, because I am a little worried about if you just read that order as it stands, it looks remarkably similar to the BCP one. So that was my concern. So I think the question is, how would we maintain the substance of the policy without make it clearer where it stands in the overall hierarchy of the council's policies? Is there a way of doing that?
I'm not sure that that can easily be done, because the PSPO order is drafted in its form to be clear to people who would then be served with a fixed penalty notice as to what the issues were that they were compromising. In terms of if it was then went to court and it was challenged as part of that process, the lawyers would look at what's behind that document. So at that stage, it would become quite obvious as to whether we were compliant with what we should do as a local authority. In terms of the draft order, I don't think we can put in parts of our enforcement policy into the draft order.
I didn't think we could, but I did think I needed to ask the question.
Yeah.
On that basis, I don't see what we lose by making sure that our supporting policies are robust enough to mount a substantial and victorious defence if the order were challenged. The last thing we want is to move forward with the order and for it to subsequently fall apart because of a challenge. So I think it would be, it's annoying, but I think that personally I would favour us getting robust legal advice on making sure that we, because of our supporting raft of policies and approach, were able to quite clearly indicate how the policy was meant not to target the homeless, but actually being targeted at professional beggars. So I don't see what we lose by getting the advice.
Hi, just following on from what you were saying. Obviously, this is the second bite of the cherry, and I don't think I was quite clear enough in the meeting last week how much I value the work that is being done, having seen it firsthand. An excellent job is being done by all the teams in the town centre. I want to make that entirely clear. So this is purely on a legal element. Secondly, an apology to members that were at the committee meeting last week. I mentioned case law. Actually, this was a bit of over-enthusiastic reporting on behalf of certain organisations, which read as if it were case law. There doesn't appear to be any case law. As Councillor English pointed out, before it actually made its way to court, it was pulled. So, whilst I am concerned that this could be challenged in the High Court, as is the route for challenging this, which sounds incredibly expensive, I am not so concerned that we need to necessarily go out and get expensive consultation. However, from the questions from last week, it appeared, and it was my understanding, that on this renewal, no further legal advice has been sought from legal services at Mid-Kent. If that is the case, I think it would be advisable that we mitigate that, cover our backs and spend a tiny bit of money now rather than later. If it has been sought, and it was my misunderstanding from last week, then obviously that's not necessary.
Thank you,
So
Chair.
Round, then I'll ask Mr Littlemore to come in. Councillor Round.
I've personally felt, Chair, and thanking you for your elucidation, as it were, that I thought you actually made a particular proposal. Had you made a particular proposal, having said that, you've already got proposers and seconders for a particular motion around this. But if you're making a specific recommendation, I will be happy to second it.
I think I was just saying that I think there's a general consensus that we do need, well, a building consensus perhaps, but I'll take Mr Littlemore back in before we move to.
Thank you, Chair. Just to respond to Councillor Conrad's question, yes, we have taken legal advice. As part of the process that reports go through, it does go to legal services as one of the respondents to the report. So we have taken advice. There hasn't been a regulatory change that would have affected what this renewal proposes as from when it was agreed the previous time. So in terms of the process that we as a local authority go through to have a proper and legally compliant PSPO, I don't think we're at risk because we've conformed with all of the route that is required and the guidance around that. As Councillor English, as the Chair explained, the issue that was raised with Bournemouth was about a whole range of prohibitions within their PSPO, which, quite frankly, were a veiled attack on, or a veiled way of dealing with rough sleeping that our policy does not seek to do. And as my colleagues have pointed out to me, there is already a Vagrancy Act that exists in this country, which is over 100 years old, still exists. So people can be prosecuted under the Vagrancy Act. What the PSPO enables us to do is work more collaboratively with people without having to go down that route. So in terms of, am I concerned that we would be challenged by renewing the PSPO? I think the risk of that being successful is very small. Judicial review is a process that first looks at, has the council conformed with its duties, its legalities in complying with the guidance, complying with the legislation. I think we can demonstrate that we have. There is no case law around those individual provisions within the PSPO that would indicate that we've put forward is non-compliant. So, as I say, I think the risk of us being ending up in the High Court is minimal. Thank you.
Councillor Hasty, and then I'll try and draw this to a close.
Thank you. Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? I just want to say that I think, you know, the fact that it's been brought to this committee now, the work has been done, enough legal advice and thought into every single part has gone into it. I've listened to it be explained at other policy advisory committees, and I'm quite confident that I'm happy to support it as it is to go through, and that Mr. Littlemore's quite right in everything that he says. So I'm perfectly happy with it.
Councillor Cannon.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with Councillor Hasty. I think that Maidstone actually operates its PSPO powers well with moderation, and I think we will have designed a very good policy, and we've used internal legal expertise to look at that. And the one thing I would be against is using external legal expertise, because that would be quite an expensive process for something that our own legal services have already said is fine. So certainly wouldn't support that, but I support what's in front of us. So thank you.
What I wasn't quite sure about from the comment from John Littlemore, if you forgive me, is whether our internal legal services have addressed the specific question of whether they felt that our general policy background would be sufficient to stave off, mitigate, assure us of a reasonable prospect of surviving a challenge, rather than whether we'd ticked all the boxes about going through the application process. Truly, if you forgive me, it is actually a different question. Sorry, it is a different question. Filling in a form and going through a process is not the same as being reasonably assured that our overall policy position would insure us against any reasonable challenge. And I'm not suggesting that we go outside for an expensive consultation. I just want an assurance before the Cabinet sign off on this that our own internal legal team have given an opinion on that particular issue, and I don't think that's unreasonable. So I'm saying that my personal view is this committee should approve the order subject to our legal team giving a specific answer to that specific question.
Yes, Chair. I can give the assurance that it's not just the process that reviewed, it was also the content.
But I would like to say, and I hope the committee would agree with me, that this is not an unreasonable thing, and we're not asking for masses of extra cost or bureaucracy. An assurance in the report that goes to the Cabinet that addresses this particular issue, that our legal services have looked at this point and are reasonably confident. I don't think that's unreasonable, Mr. Littlemore or Cabinet members. So I think that we could, as a committee, reach a compromise on that position. It's not unreasonable. Javinsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Councillor Hastie and Councillor Cannon, but I'd just like to put a couple of thoughts out there for the Cabinet member. Whilst it's admirable to see a town centre PSPO, I still talk to residents who do not feel safe coming into the town centre. Whether that's perception or not is a different thing. So somehow we need to get that message out there. The second thing that occurs to me is, why isn't there a PSPO for Headcorn?
Well, that is a process that could be gone through if you can demonstrate the need for it. Did you want to specifically come back on a PSPO for Headcorn anyway?
Noted.
Councillor Round.
Sorry, I'm going to make light of it, but I mean, we can talk about homelessness and vagrancy and bad behaviour and alcohol, but be warned, this is the summer of madness. It always is the summer of madness in Headcorn, and what we have is people with eggs, cream and flour throwing it at everybody and anybody, including passing cars and the tourism industry. So be warned.
Martin, you shouldn't give us a confession in committee. Anyway, I'm going to propose an amendment to the motion that was proposed, that we, as a committee, recommend approval of the order, subject to a confirmation from our internal legal team that the issues that have been raised have been addressed and they're reasonably confident in the overall policy position. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Clark. I'll put the amendment to the vote. Yeah. Sorry, that's a very good point. Are the original mover of the original motion willing to accept the amendment?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair.
In that case, that's a substantive motion. Those in favour or those against? Thank you, that's unanimous. I think that's a reasonable... Oh no, it's not, almost unanimous. Those against? Abstentions? Right, okay. Thank you. I think that's a reasonable... Thank you very much for your input, members and officers. And have a good evening. And that, I think, concludes the meeting.